Hello, everyone. This is Jose. In this episode, Joe and I chatted with Joel Goldberg, a member of the Kansas City Royals broadcast team with 25 years of experience in professional sports. We discuss how building relationships develops trust and allows for the exchange of ideas while creating an environment where constructive criticism can flow. We hope you enjoy this episode as it gave different perspectives on leading your team, whether on the ball field or in the conference room. Enjoy.
Life, learning, leadership, the Llama Lounge.
Yo, welcome back to the Llama Lounge, a dialogue on all things life, learning, and leadership. This is Joe Bogdan. I have with me my brother, Jose Ramon Jr. What's up, fam?
What is up, Joe? How are you doing?
I'm doing well, bro. How's your week going?
Doing good. I got a confession.
What's up?
We bought another kayak.
Man, that's that mill-to-mill money. I don't know how you afford all these kayaks, but that's good stuff.
Dave Ramsey, Financial Peace University.
All right. That's good stuff. Well, hey, bro, we keep getting lucky, don't we?
Oh, for sure.
Sure. So today we have with us another amazing guest in the lounge, Mid-America Emmy Award Winning member of the Kansas City Royals television broadcast team, Joel Goldberg. How are you, Joel?
I'm good, Joe, Jose. Great to be with you in what I say is this crazy virtual world that we live in. But you know what? It's been a good thing. It's allowed people to come together and meet each other and do things that we never did before.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of blessings that definitely come with it. I mean, if you look for them, and I mean, you and I probably wouldn't be talking right now,
Nope.
right? I mean, so there are some great things that happen throughout this. So for our listeners, Joel has 25 years of experience developing and maintaining strong relationships with pro athletes, coaches, and team management, and is the host of the amazing podcast, Rounding the Bases. First off, Joel, we really appreciate you taking the time to visit the Llama Lounge and share with us your remarkable insight.
Well, it's good to be in the lounge, first of all, and it's my first Llama Lounge, so that's pretty cool and unique too for a guy that has been in the business and around for a lot of years. I've never been in the Llama Lounge, so that's cool. And you guys talk about a lot of the things that are important to me, and we can get into all that obviously. But one thing that I've told people many times is there are so many similarities between sports and the military. I was never in the military. I've got a couple family members that were for a little bit, but not much. And so, of course, I have great respect for everyone that has served or serves our country. But what always draws me to members of all branches, I won't say what my favorite one is because that'll get me in trouble, or I could just suck up to you guys. But what really draws me to conversations with members of the military is the culture and the leadership. And I think there are a lot of similarities to sports, difference being that one is wins and losses in terms of games and and certainly a lot of pressure and salary, and the other one is wins and losses ultimately, which can be life and death, and
Right.
certainly defending our country and all that, but the culture and the structure has to be on par. And
Right.
that's where, to me, and what has always drawn me to so many people in all branches, because there are lessons to be learned. And I think you guys know that too, but from an outsider's perspective and from a civilian's perspective, I have that ability to see it from the outside in a way that it's not my everyday life. It's your everyday life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think we're going to really enjoy getting that perspective because I know Jose and I mean, we're sports fans and we're also in the military, and we could probably make some correlations there. And there's probably, a strong connection there as to why there's so many military personnel that are fans of so many team sports. But we'd love to hear your perspective on these things. But before that, at the lounge, whenever we have an opportunity to have a guest on, we love for them to share their story. We find that we can learn a lot of lessons and glean some wisdom from the experiences of others. And we're hoping you could share with us, how did Joel Goldberg become the Joel Goldberg we see today?
Yeah, it's crazy. And I know, Joe, you mentioned it. I'm a storyteller. I love storytelling. I don't know that I got into my television career knowing that my ultimate passion was storytelling.
Mm.
I got into it because I had a dream of talking about sports. And to me, that was the games and the athletes and all of that, which is great. But when you get past the whole, oh my gosh, you get to talk to him. Oh my gosh, you get to do that. It's like anything else in life. Don't get me wrong. I love it,
Mhm.
but there's more to it. I think what makes it so interesting is the stories, because everybody has a story. And certainly when you talk about, someone at the level of athletes that I cover, there are only so many of them in the world in each of their respective sports. It's the elite of the elite. It's the 1%, whatever you want to call it. For
Mhm.
me, I'll try to give the short version of the story. There's no such thing as a short version when I'm talking, but I grew up wanting to be a sports broadcaster. Of course, I wanted to be the guy hitting the game-winning home run or, hitting the winning shot and all of that. I knew pretty early on that I was mediocre at best, and I'm not being humble about that. But I did know that I loved talking about sports. I lived and breathed sports. I think the young version of me was even more passionate about it than the old version of me, because now it's business and it's work.
Mm.
Work that I love. But as a kid, my whole life revolved around sports. Like so many of the people, the men and women that are listening or watching this right now, they'll feel the same way too. So many of us sports fans grew up idolizing our sports heroes and watching the games. And for me, growing up, really 80s, 70s, but mostly 80s, we didn't have internet and all that stuff then. So, you read the box scores, you'd see the stories even as a kid, and I'd go into school and I'd drive my teachers crazy talking about all this stuff. I was the guy that came into school recapping as a second, third, fourth grader, recapping everything that had gone on. So to get to the end of the story, it's what I always wanted to do. I went to college at the University of Wisconsin. I grew up in Philadelphia and then Chicago, went to the University of Wisconsin, and my only goal was to get into television. I did. Broke in a small town, local news, and kind of climbed the ranks, one news station to the next, and then eventually full-time sports. I was doing sports pretty much the whole way, but got out of television news and got into regional sports. And, here I am now, about ready to begin my 13th season of Kansas City Royals baseball. I've been in TV for 25 years, and, it's a dream job. It's exactly where I always wanted to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is amazing. So when you're moving up, because I liken it to any other big business, right? You start moving in at the beginning. And did you have, I'm sure you had aspirations, but did you feel like you'd be where you're at right now back then?
I, I, I hoped, but I would also say that I don't know what that looked like. I mean, I can remember, I wish I journaled or took notes or something. So, I don't remember all of my thought processes. It's so long ago. But what I do remember is I think I remember having 2 or 3 sort of ultimate goals.
Mm.
And they weren't, they were all different paths, I guess, or at least in my mind, what I thought would be success or living the dream, or I don't know. One was, hey, I'd love to be on SportsCenter one day. Back then everybody wanted to be the next Chris Berman or Dan Patrick or, Stuart Scott or any of those guys. The other was, could I be the anchor on the local news doing sports, whether it be back where I grew up as a young kid in Philadelphia or really what I considered and still consider home in Chicago. And that to me was what I defined as success. I didn't get to any one of those things, but yet I don't, when I was coming up, there was no such thing in terms of team broadcasts, baseball or any sport for that matter. There was no such thing as a pre and a post game show on TV. Sideline reporters, there were a handful of them, but it wasn't a regular thing. And so the journey just sort of took me this way, and it's been the greatest. I mean, I say it all the time that they pay me to travel with a baseball team. They pay me to enter games and then go on camera and talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, in some ways, I'm shortchanging the whole profession by saying that, because it's obviously much more than that.
Right.
But in the simplest of terms, and I don't go into work every day being like, oh my gosh, I get to talk about baseball. But because I've been doing it for so long, but I also try to always remember that perspective. I think that the perspective of what would a kid say about this opportunity, or an adult for that matter. Look, we all have plenty of friends unfortunately, that don't love what they do and they haven't found something passionate and they're just paying the bills. And look, we all have to survive and get by. So I happen to be lucky enough, and it doesn't mean I'm living the perfect life. I got issues like everybody else, but it does mean that I get to do something that I truly enjoy. And so I do try to think about that. I try to think about that when I walk on the field. And just, this will sound cheesy, but it'll make sense. Just almost to feel your feet. Like I am walking across a Major League Baseball field right now, and it's really easy for me to take that for granted because this is my office.
Right.
But this is what I dreamed of doing, even if I didn't know exactly what that dream looked like. And how many people would love to be in my shoes right now? And look, if you don't love what you do, it doesn't matter how many people want to be in your shoes. It's not going to resonate with you. I love what I do. So, I do try to keep that perspective every day. I think my perspective will be different as we get back to baseball next month, in late July too, after so much time off. Right. I mean, the last baseball game, the broadcast that I was a part of was, I think, early October of 2019. I mean, in baseball terms, we're used to 6 months on, 6 months off. It's been more than that, which is, of course, a lot of people's story right now too.
Right. Yeah. And that, and to what you were kind of talking about is, your broadcasting, your broadcast team. And by the way, I just go ahead and preface this. I'm a complete idiot when it comes to what's required to be on a broadcast team and, what you go through every day. But something that I noticed that's different about you from when I'm watching video, and I've been a sports fan for a long time, watch SportsCenter quite a bit. And I realize that sometimes it's just snippets or whatever I might be seeing with the rest of the teams. But what I see you do is really tell the story. I mean, and I'm not saying that nobody else does, right? But I'm saying that the way you do it, you bring out something special in each of the people that you talk to. And I will, and you talked about how like you kind of got into storytelling. Did that just evolve? You know what I mean? Like, because you're an amazing storyteller. I'll just tell you that right now. And even on your website, it says building culture and success through storytelling. So I mean, did that evolve into that?
I think so. I mean, first off, I think my producers would all say like, yeah, that's great. He tells stories, but he talks too much. And, we gotta get to a commercial break. We got to get to the next pitch and all that. I mean, there's a song and dance and a balance to this, which, in a podcast format, whether it's yours or mine, or even, if you do some talk radio where you can kind of do what you want, then you get in the parameters of a television broadcast. Don't miss a pitch or don't miss a home run. And it's like, hey, I got this great 3-minute story to tell, and I got to tell it in 15 or 30 seconds. And look, if any of my producers were watching us right now, they'd be like, yeah, you haven't figured that out yet. So I'll slap myself around on that. But I don't know, Joe. I don't know that I ever thought as a kid that I was a storyteller. What I do remember is always, so this is going to sound like the same thing, but I remember always wanting to be the one to tell people what happened. And and I guess that's all storytelling, but like even when I think right now of, say, the protests and the racial injustice in this country, and I see, people out there and potentially tear gas or dangerous situations, or even, some of the correspondents around the world, I always wanted to be in their shoes. And it wasn't that I wanted to seek danger. I'm pretty wimpy, I think, actually. Like there are a lot of things that you guys have done in your training that I don't think I could do. I mean, I suppose ultimately if pushed into it, I could, but there's a lot of things that you guys do. I mean, that would scare me in terms of basic training, or in terms of jumping out of an airplane, or in terms of like a lot of things that would scare the heck out of me. But I always wanted to be the one telling everybody what was going on. Like even right now, as we're getting ready to go back to baseball, I don't think any of us are going to travel. I think that's going to kind of be the thing across Major League Baseball. And we'll figure that out. Like, home games will be at home. Road games, I think, will be at our home stadium working off of a monitor. But I know that it was mentioned to me a few weeks back that if somehow we could get one person on the road with the team, it would be me. And I don't know I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know yet. I know what they're getting at. They're getting at, let's have a presence. Like I don't think any of us are going to be on a field. I just talked about walking on the field. I don't think any of us are going to walk on a field this year. I don't think any of us are going to walk in a locker room this year. They're going to do everything they can to keep these players safe. And not that keeping me away guarantees that, but they're going to try to close that circle and do whatever they can to keep this sport healthy and going. But when it was mentioned to me that if we could get you on the road and have a presence, and if it logistically made sense and it was approved, none of which may be the case, my first thought was, wow, I could be the one that's there. I get to be the one. And if that means that I'm just standing in the stands, but I'm the one person that's there and everybody has to rely on me to be the one to pass that on, that's a huge privilege. And there's storytelling, obviously, to that. So I don't know why or when or what it is. I love being the one to tell people what's going on. And that, by the way, that doesn't have to be on TV or radio or sports. I mean, that could be anything in life. That doesn't have to be the news. That could be anything. And so I've just always liked that role. And what I have come to learn over the years, much later in life, and in my career than early on, is that everyone has a story to tell. Every one of us, whether we're an athlete or not, has a story to tell. The challenge, it's not even so much telling it, it's finding it out. And so I like that part of the game. And the only way to find out is to ask.
Right. But something that you do even beyond that is you're able to tie it to principles, whether it's leadership lessons. And I mean, I know you're probably going to downplay it, but I think that's an art. You know what I mean? I think what you do is an art, and you're great at it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I just think there's an aspect of listening, and we all could do that better, myself included, because, we're all thinking about the next thing, the next question, the next answer, the next, what do I have going on? What's next on the schedule? What's distracting me?
Right.
It's probably more so than ever. We're in a world where it's very easy to be distracted. We have a lot to do that, but I don't know. I mean, I guess I would agree that it's an art form. I couldn't say whether I'm, great at it, or, I mean, I think I'm okay at it, and that's all subjective too. That depends on who you talk to, but I do love it. And I just listening and being inquisitive and then passing that on. And that's true in anything. Like, that's true with what's going on in society. That's true with what's going on, whether it's your job or what's going on in the world. And the only way to learn is to ask and listen and pay attention. So, when you say that it's an art form, Joe, and you're taking that and turning it into something, that's paying attention. Yeah. And then doing something with it, I think,
Right.
I'll say this, like, effective storytelling is memorable. When people leave one of my speeches, I want them just to remember something, and it might not have to be every single point, but if there's one story or one point that resonated with them and that makes them better, then I feel like I've done my job. And that to me is where the effective storytelling comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you tie it to sports, though, it really does resonate with me. And, it's funny because I think, like you talked about earlier, military and sports, I mean, they just go hand in hand, since the beginning of each. They've, it's always been something. And I remember there's commanders that I've worked for, and they're like, man, I just hate to make another sports analogy, but it really fits right now. Right. So we go through it. And I remember one that I really remember was, everybody complains about our field exercises and our training exercises. Like, this isn't real. We don't know what they're going to do. And I remember he said, I hate to do another sports analogy, but when football players are practicing all week, do they really know what their opponent's going to do? Do they know? He's like, we just gather intel and we try to figure out what we think they might do, and we prepare. Is running into pads the same as running into another human being that's trying to force you down? No, but there's still value in doing those things, right? And that really stuck with me. When we're doing training, I was like, okay, yeah, we might think this is dumb or might not totally apply, but there's still value that comes with that. And I think, stories like the ones that you can share can really help people kind of like, okay, this is meaningful.
I think that what resonates so much about sports And, I'll back up and say, to me, when I speak to an audience, and one of the easy sells, but at the same time, tough sells I have for someone hiring me is the easy sell is if it's a group of sports fans. Oh, cool. Get an inside look or whatever. The tough sell is it's really not a sports speech. So I'm happy to talk to a group afterwards, and I know that I'm going to, speak to a group with you soon, and I'm happy to sit there and answer questions about the game, last night's game, the state of the game, favorite athlete, any of that stuff. That's cool. I'm good with that. But that's not what my speeches are going to be about. My speeches are going to take lessons learned in sports and taking them and applying them to what I call the quote unquote real world. And that'll interest the sports people. But my goal ultimately is to bring in the people. Like, the best compliment that I ever get is when someone comes up to me afterwards, a man or a woman, and they say, hey, I just want to let you know I'm not really much of a sports fan. Sorry, but that was really good. And that's when I know that I've connected. And there again, Joe, is the effective storytelling. I just happen to have 25 years worth of material that no one else or not a lot of other people have. And then it's a matter of how you use it. And I think, again, the military is the same way. I mean, I've had multiple military experiences just because of the position that I have that has enabled me to come onto the inside. And that's what we all want. We want to peek behind the curtain. That's one of the keys to storytelling. We all want to peek behind the curtain. If anybody that's checking out this podcast right now, how many people that are checking out this podcast right now have been in a Major League Baseball clubhouse or been on a field or talked to Albert Pujols or whoever it is? And so, I'm privileged to have that peek behind the curtain. And then it's, again, like I said before, a matter of what you do with it. But, there are lessons, just in the same way that you were talking about different things that you learned early on. I don't know if does this make sense, or why are we doing this? And that from a teaching standpoint now too, like it may not make sense at the time, but there are lessons that we learn in this every single day. So that's I started my speaking business 3 years ago. I stumbled upon it pretty late and suggested to me by some friends, and I didn't know if such a thing even existed. But I what it's done is it's forced me to pay more attention to the big picture and the details. But really what I mean by that is to stop focusing so much on the wins and losses. Stop focusing so much on the box score, so to speak. What is part of the story that is not in the box score?
Right.
Because the numbers can't tell you everything. Well, it's like we say all the time in baseball, a guy goes 0 for 4, but he smoked the ball 4 times and it's going to show up as an 0 for 4. Is there something else to it?
Right.
Oh, he's hitting the ball really hard. He feels pretty good. He's having some bad luck right now. What's going on in his head? And it's amazing, the next day, suddenly he gets hot. So, oh, you predicted that one. No, I didn't predict that one. I'm just paying a little bit of attention. It's just digging a little bit deeper.
Right. I mean, and that's tied directly to leadership. I mean, we're not even saying, you might not be directly leading that person, but you're learning about them by observing and listening and seeing what's going on and analyzing and asking yourself questions about what's going on. And I think that ties directly to what the Llama Lounge is all about, life learning and leadership.
And it all comes together, right? I mean, it all does. I mean, life learning, leadership, you not to get too hokey or cheesy, you tie all those things together, you got a pretty good place to be. And, I think there are abilities for all of us to lead every day. You don't have to be a born leader. You don't have to be a CEO of a company. You don't have to be a colonel or a commander or whatever it is. Obviously, all those people garner a lot of respect and they've earned it. But you can be a leader no matter what you do, if you have all the rest of it figured out, I think. And so that kind of stuff really fascinates me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't have a better way of asking you because I just want to hear a story. And I have no better way to ask you to be able to tie, we just want to sit down and listen to a story.
Yeah, I got plenty of stories, man.
Yeah. And I mean, if it has anything to do with learning or leadership, and I mean, there's things that we talk about all the time here, cultivating a championship winning coaching tree, developing your folks, human capital investment strategy, which I think sports teams do very well, right? I mean, they are strategizing on how they're investing in their people. But these are, I mean, I have so many things I want to ask you. We only have so much limited time, and I just want to hear a great story.
Well, I know, like, for me, I always want to hear all the military stories, and you guys want to hear everything but that, right? You've had your life's fill of that, so I could sit there and tell you about how in early February, right before spring training, I climbed into the cockpit of a B-2, and that was like, I got chills. But you want to hear the sports stories. I could tell you about my first ever experience on a military aircraft back in 1995, hopping on a C-130 and
There we go.
going down to my first TV job up in northern Wisconsin. They invited the local National Guard up in Wisconsin, invited a local reporter to come and travel with them and do behind the scenes stories for 2 weeks of their annual training in Panama, and then being in those Black Hawk helicopters and the pilots trying to make sure we were going to get a little queasy going up and around those mountains. You guys have lived all that before. Like, those are the things that I remember. But there's so many unbelievable lessons of leadership in sports. And I've been lucky to have spent the last 12 seasons with the Kansas City Royals, because I came here in 2008. I left St. Louis. I'd worked there before, and St. Louis was, and still to this day, they're contending for the playoffs every single year.
Yeah.
But to have been able to come here, it was a better job opportunity for me. And people forget that sometimes too. Like, wait, how can you go from a team that's contending to a last place team? And it's like, oh, I'm more airtime, more opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But I am so fortunate because I had a chance to come somewhere where their culture was really bad. They were in the early stages of building. They had new management take over in the middle of 2006, and I got here at the start of 2008. And, they said that it would be possibly an 8-year process. They took over in 2006. The Royals went to the World Series in 2014. There's your 8 years.
Yeah.
I've watched the bad, the good, and everything in between about how you build it. So in general terms, I've seen all those life lessons. In specific terms, I think I probably have it from a baseball or any sport for that matter. I mean, I covered a lot of sports for a lot of years. You start talking about stories, and 1998, I arrived in St. Louis, and I remember my first day working for the local Fox television station. I believe it was September 28th, 1998. And that was the day after Mark McGwire hit his 70th home run. So we got to town on a Friday, my wife and I. No, we weren't married yet. Fiance. 21 years later, we just had our anniversary. But we get there, and I had a college roommate that was from St. Louis. So his family had season tickets, so they brought us. We got there on a Friday. We'd driven down from Madison, Wisconsin. And I get there on a Friday, and they bring us to the Cardinals game. Great seats. And we watched McGwire hit his 66th home run. This was during the home run chase. And then he hit 2 on Saturday. We weren't there. And then 2 on Sunday to end up at 70. And a buddy of mine was working at the local Fox station. He and I had worked together in our first job. We were competitors in our second job. And then he had kind of opened some doors and, put me on the radar. And so I'm working with him. So my first day was going to be that Monday, the 28th, but he brought me to work with him. And, I was watching the home run chase McGwire and Sosa like everybody in the country, in awe of it. I'd never covered a Major League Baseball team. I'd been around some major leaguers, but I'd never covered it on a regular basis. So all right, I'm going to go to work a day early with him and just check things out. But his his responsibility that day was the St. Louis Rams, and the Rams were terrible. And I'm just like, as a fan, I was just like, I want to go watch McGuire. But we went and we watched the St. Louis Rams. I don't remember if they won or lost. For some reason in my mind, I feel like they played the Arizona Cardinals, which was funny because they used to be the St. Louis Football Cardinals. And I remember the quarterback that year was a guy named Tony Banks. He was a star at Michigan State. And it was a meaningless game, I guess. I just remember that after that, we wrapped up all the Rams stuff. And then we went from the Rams right down the street from what was then called the TWA Dome or Trans World Dome, and then it turned into the Edward Jones Dome, and now the Rams are in LA. But we went from that like a news person would do, and then we went over to Old Busch Stadium, and we got there in time just to get some of the post-game interviews after McGuire had done what he did. And my first day was the next day, like that was the start of it, and the Rams went 4-12 that year. So terrible football. And the next year, which was my first full year of covering the Rams.
Yeah.
The next year, 1999, was when Kurt Warner emerged and they won the Super Bowl against all odds. So they went from, I think, 4-12 to 12-4. And so that was my first full year of covering the St. Louis Rams. I'd covered the Green Bay Packers in Wisconsin and Brett Favre, but I'd never covered a team in any professional sport on a daily basis because I'd never been in an NFL or Major League Baseball or NHL city. And so here I am, my first full year of covering it, and suddenly I'm traveling with the Rams and they're winning. And I'll back up a little bit. 1999 was the year the Rams finally thought they were going to be good because they had traded for a quarterback by the name of Trent Green, who had been with the Washington Redskins, and he was a St. Louis kid. He'd gone to high school in St. Louis, and so finally they got a guy, and they'd acquired Marshall Faulk, and they had all these studs, and now they just needed a quarterback, and they get Trent Green. So I'm the sideline reporter for the local Fox affiliate. I think what was the second preseason game in St. Louis, and I'm the guy doing all the reports on the sideline, and Trent Green gets hurt. He gets knocked out of the game, tears his ACL. Rodney Harrison, who's now on NBC, was for this San Diego Chargers, knocked him out. Season over. And I remember Dick Vermeil, the head coach, is walking off the sidelines, and I got to grab him now. Like I got to interview him for that halftime interview, and he's just lost his star quarterback. And so I asked him, well, what do you do now? And he goes, well, we got Kurt Warner. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay. Like I met Kurt Warner a week or two before in the locker room during training camp, and he seemed like the nicest guy ever. I remember being in the scrum interviewing Kurt Warner and walking away thinking, man, I hope this guy makes the team because he's really nice. Like I really like dealing with him. Never in my wildest dream did I think he'd be a Hall of Fame quarterback. I told that story maybe a year ago to Trent Green. He lives in Kansas City here now. Went on to play for the Chiefs, and both. I mean, the funny part now is that both Trent Green and Kurt Warner are both very prolific NFL announcers. They're both analysts now. And I was telling him that story because I don't think he remembered that I was a sideline reporter. He goes, "Oh, so you're the one that messed up my career." But I was there for the start of the former grocery store shelf stocker turned NFL Hall of Famer. And there I am with Marshall Faulk. And, Marshall was another Hall of Famer. Marshall could be very enigmatic. You catch him on the wrong day and he, you didn't want to look funny at him. But Marshall, I always knew how to, I just always knew how to read him, I think. And so I got along great with Marshall. And, I remember a couple of years later, we're down in New Orleans playing, and he'd grown up in the projects in New Orleans, and being able with my connection with him to set up going and sitting down with his mom in the house I think he'd grown up with. And, I'm doing this one-on-one interview for the news with Marshall Faulk's mom. And then to this day, I'll say that I believe Marshall Faulk is the best all-around athlete that I've ever covered. And then to watch the emergence of Albert Pujols. And, I remember sitting with Albert Pujols in spring training in, I think it was 2001. and he had only played in A-ball the year before. We knew that he had put up ridiculous stats and he was now suddenly a potential star in the making, but we weren't expecting what we were, and not that quickly. And you know, the baseball teams, sometimes they play that last game of spring training in a big league stadium to get ready. And so they were playing, I believe, if I remember correctly, I wasn't there, in Arizona against the Diamondbacks. If I remember correctly, this is, in my mind, this is what it is. And Bobby Bonilla, the veteran, had been signed by the Cardinals, or was with the Cardinals, and he got hurt, and like in that last game, and so they had an opening. So they called up Albert Pujols. How many people remember this? They called up Pujols to be their third baseman. And there, just like Kurt Warner, a career was born. Now, I think people at that point knew Pujols had the chance to be something good, not arguably the best player of his generation, certainly in the top 5. I mean, he's one of the greatest home run hitters in the history of the game. There's only 4 players in the history of baseball that have at least 600 home runs and 3,000 hits. I think the others are Hank Aaron, Barry Bonds, Alex Rodriguez, Albert Pujols. And I was there for every step of the way. And to take it one step further, and then I'll take a pause from all the stories here, is that I was there with Pujols when he broke in 01, and I left after 07, and it took me till 07 to earn his trust and to be able to have a productive professional relationship with him. He was the guy in my whole career. If you look at my website, there's a testimonial from him on there about me. And never in my wildest dreams that I would have ever think that was true, because I don't know if I would say that I despised him. I think I probably did. I hate and hesitate to say that, because I consider Albert someone that I respect and a friend. But for 6 years, I was intimidated by him, and I never could figure him out. And he didn't know me. And once I learned how to connect with him, man, that guy's done more one-on-one interviews with me and more things to help my career than any superstar I've ever been around. And there were a lot of lessons learned there too about how to treat people. You know, think about in your guys' world, and you know, the highest level officers, and you know, you have to respect them, and they're in a position that demands respect. But most of them probably don't want to be put in a position where it's awkward, and you know, you're almost worshiping them. You know, it's like they want to be treated as human beings too. So once I learned that about Albert, it was like, wait a minute, yeah, he's one of the greatest players of all time, but how many people actually treat him like a normal person?
Right.
So
right.
Yeah.
And the testimonial on the website, Joel Goldberg is one of the most professional and outstanding guys in media. It has been a privilege to work in the game with him for nearly 15 years. He is someone I call a friend. And, you know, that last line right there speaks volumes, right? Someone I call a friend.
I'll tell you what, though, like in 2007, he invited me out to lunch, and never in my wildest dreams did I think that would be true. And in 2007, he was hands down the best player on the planet. I mean, he had overtaken Barry Bonds. There was no one more feared than Pujols. And the very short of that story is that I connected with him because he'd grown up in the Dominican, and then his family moved to New York, and then they ended up with some other family members coming to Kansas City. So when he was 16 years old, he came to Kansas City. He graduated from high school here. He went to junior college here. And I knew that. And I just sort of took a shot in the dark in 2007. And I realized my relationship with him wasn't good. I don't know that he would say his relationship was bad with me. It just was nothing. You know, I was just another guy asking for something. You know, hey, can you do this? Can you do this? And a lot of times it was no. But I'd never earned his respect or tried to or knew how to. And so I pulled him aside. I said, hey, can I talk to you about something personal? It's private, no interview, no cameras. And we were in Houston at Minute Maid Park, or whatever they called it back then, Enron Field, or whatever it was in that year. And we went into the visiting batting cage, and I basically said to him, hey, this is confidential. I hope you'll keep it secret, but I have this job opportunity in Kansas City, and I know you went to high school there, and I'm just wondering if you had any advice for me. And it was like I mean, in hindsight now, I look back and I say, how many people in my role or in life ever asked him for advice? What most people were asking him for was, what can you give me?
Right.
Not something that asks for respect or shows respect. Hey, what do you have to make me, what can you do this interview? Can you sign this autograph or whatever it is? And we don't ask for autographs, but everybody always was pulling at him. But yet I wanted to tap into him and his personal experiences. And so he gave me advice and told me, it'd be a great place to live, a great place to raise a family. And at that point we did have kids. We're married and kids. And, and I told him it was confidential, and he said, your secret is safe with me. And 2 weeks later, I took the job for the next season, but I found out 2 weeks later that I got it. And so I told him we were in Milwaukee, and he said, let me take you out to lunch. And he takes me to lunch at this place. It was like in the city, residential. And it was in the back of a Puerto Rican grocery store was a restaurant. To this day, I don't know what he ordered. I don't speak Spanish. He ordered it in Spanish. And it's like me and Albert Pujols talking about life, kids, and eating the greatest meal I ever had. And I'm just pinching myself the whole time. I'm like, how did I get here? I don't even think I liked this guy a few weeks ago. And it was a life-changing thing for me, because it just made me realize, like, until you get to know someone, don't judge them. And just because they're famous, don't put them on a pedestal. And, and everything changed from that point on, in the way I went about dealing with superstars.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great story. And I think it talks so much. Like, there's been people who I've definitely not had a good relationship with. And I had to sit back and wonder, is like, well, what can I do to know a little bit more about this person? Right. And then sometimes those turned out and, just became some of the best relationships I've ever had. And
you never know.
It's a good lesson. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's I think Abraham Lincoln said that. It's like, I don't know that man. I better get to know him a little bit better. Yeah. So yeah.
We all can do better with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's cool. And I definitely want to get into some fun questions. I know Jose probably has some about sports, but I wanted to touch on something that I see on your website, and I just was hoping that you might be able to dive in a little bit more on it, because specifically on your website, it talks about, what the Joel Goldberg experience is. And it talks about sparking, inspiring, and cultivating. Are those things that just kind of like, is that like part of your philosophy, or because it's very prominent on your site? It's talking about sparking meaningful conversation, inspiring bold leadership, and cultivating networks based on trust.
I think first and foremost, trust is everything,
Mm-hmm.
and that Albert Pujols was proof of that. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, and I mean, I'll let the secret out here. I was really trying to, ulterior motives can get you in trouble, but I was really trying to get to a point where I could get up the courage, even as a friend, to ask him to do a testimonial. I don't like to ask people to do favors. And I was trying to ask him for the testimonial for my website, and because I talk so much about him. And so he was in with the Los Angeles Angels visiting the Royals, and he was sitting there with his son, who was older at this point. And I said, hey, I got a confession to make. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, he used to scare the living heck out of me. I said, you really, really, you scared me, and I didn't know you, and I don't even, know that I liked you a whole lot. And he kind of got embarrassed. He got, here's a superstar, got red in the face. And he said, you know what? Everybody wants something from me.
Mm-hmm.
But once I trust them, once I trust you, I'll do anything for you. And so when I talk about trust on there, and cultivating relationships, it all starts with trust. So, the three of us, hopefully we'll have a little more trust after this conversation than we did before. But I'll also point out a really, really fascinating and deep discussion I had with Joe Madden, now Albert Pujols' manager with the Los Angeles Angels. But, Joe, to me, I believe he's the most fascinating manager in baseball. I've never had the chance to work with him on a daily basis, but I always enjoyed when he was with the Tampa Bay Rays, being able to visit with him, the 2 series a year we'd play them with the Royals, because you could talk to him about life, philosophy, baseball, a good book, a bottle of wine, whatever. It didn't have to be about baseball. And then he was with the Cubs, first guy to win a world championship with the Cubs in over 100 years. And they were here in interleague play a couple of years ago. And I walked into his office. I said, Joe, I talk a lot about trust. How do you define trust? And Joe is like a Renaissance man. So he says, well, I just happened to design with a local artist a print that we're selling for charity on my website about that topic. So only you, Joe. Like I throw out a topic and he's got a print about it already. But basically like this thing, and I use the slide in some of my speeches, it shows and it says, build relationships, trust, and I think it says exchange ideas, and then constructive criticism flows. I think I'm getting that right. So, but basically what he's saying is that you build a relationship, and then as you build that relationship, you build trust. Once you build trust, then you can have a free exchange of ideas. Once you have a free exchange of ideas, then you can let the constructive criticism flow to what, as he pointed it out to me in the, it wasn't even an interview. I just recorded it on my phone and I asked him if I could do that. He said, once you have all of that, you get to a situation where no one's ameliorating the boss. The response I usually give to audiences is no one in baseball even knows what the hell the word ameliorate means. But it's a good lesson to any culture or any locker room, team, you name it, organization, that, I can't sit here right now and say, Jose, you know what you need to do better at your job? You'd be like, okay, fine. This dude's on TV and, he has all these, name dropping stories and blah, blah, blah. He doesn't know me because we haven't built the relationship and the trust. But once we do, you let your guard down and you start going back and forth. And now, hey, you know what? Now that you mentioned that, what about this? Oh, and so you think about cultures and good locker rooms when you've established that, and that's what the good leaders do, then you really have a positive environment. And sometimes one where that leads to the, teams that aren't the most talented, or organizations that aren't number one in talent or money spent, that have that, what we call chemistry. Mm-hmm. So I hope that answers a little bit of what's on there about sparking. And, I and that happens, we get back, Joe, to storytelling and all of that. I think I could spark those conversations and that thought process through these types of stories. And obviously when you get in front of an audience and, you got to tighten things up a little bit and keep things moving. But, over the course of an hour speech, or right now I'm doing more like 30 to 40 minutes because virtual is a little bit different, but with the, social distancing. But it's amazing how you can get one story to flow into the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and then tie it all together for one big message. And that's really what that's all about.
Yeah, that's awesome, because I think that translates to everything, just like you said. And I remember reading a Patrick Lencioni book, the five dysfunctions of a team, and it actually talks about the opposite of that, puts it in a negative. Like, if you don't build the trust, what's going to happen, right? And it gets all the way to the point where now people aren't committed because they don't feel like they have buy-in, because they can't talk about what the issues are, because they don't trust that they're gonna, that they're gonna have that free flow and not be judged. And then it leads to, all kinds of things at the end. So lack of accountability and everything. So that's a great perspective that you shared with us. I really appreciate it. Oh, sweet. So, Jose, I know you gotta be dying to ask a question about the Dodgers, man.
Oh, come on, bring on your Dodgers. Maybe this is the year. Maybe they'll win their first world championship since '88 in a 60-game season. You never know.
I know. We'll go to a home run derby and see what our guys can do. Right. I don't know. There is the questions about baseball, but I couldn't help but think about, with everything that you were just saying, just the state that our society's in right now, right? Establishing trust, having open dialogue, and whether your team is in your neighborhood or, sometimes biracial families, right? There's a lot of tough conversations happening right now. Mm-hmm. And I think you hit it on the head with everything you said, right? It's just going in there and you have to establish a relationship before you can have those tough conversations. And I don't know. Hopefully that's where we get to as a nation. Honestly, that's what I've just been thinking about for a while now, so as you shared that story, that's what I was thinking about. And I've seen, there are different sports teams are handling this differently. Do you have any advice in regards to that?
Yeah, a lot. And, I'm glad that you brought that up, Jose, because this is like, I don't know. I feel like every generation has said, oh, things are so bad. To me right now, it feels like it's worse than it's ever been. And I'm an optimist too. Like I'm almost always a glass half full. It makes me cringe to find the negatives when you could find the positives. That's just me. But, I feel like we're certainly in a moment here right now. And now the question is, what do we do with that moment? And it's a good observation, I think, on your part that, I wasn't necessarily thinking about the country and the divide and the race and politics. I try to stay out of politics. You guys as military guys certainly know that drill. Doesn't mean you don't have opinions. Doesn't mean that you don't have one guy or another that you're going to vote for. But, your job is bigger than politics, right? And I almost look at my job in the same way in this sense. It's different than yours, but, I don't want to tell half of my Royals audience to tune out. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that the whole garbage about, you're an athlete, stick to sports, that drives me crazy. Like, why can't an athlete have an opinion when a businessman can?
Right.
Why can an athlete not have an opinion when a politician can? I have incredible respect for any athlete that wants to voice their opinion, and then I'll agree with them or disagree with them. But from my standpoint, I know that my platform is not built and people aren't watching me for politics. They're watching me for sports. And I want everybody to watch in the same way that I want everybody in that audience, sports fan or not, for a speech to be engaged. And that's back to the storytelling. But I also think that we all have a platform in some way or another, and I think I have a bigger one, certainly locally, to be able to speak out on certain things. And, when you look at the pandemic right now, somehow wearing masks or not wearing masks, the pandemic or no pandemic, has become political. It should be. Right. Somehow the racial discussions have become political. They shouldn't be. Like, it's about humanity. So that to me is where I look at sports, and we have an opportunity here. Now, we'll see if they do it or not. I think a lot of sports, baseball for sure, has been slow to respond over the years to certain things. And I think there are a lot of concerns with baseball about the lack of minorities, specifically blacks, in the game. If you look back to when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, you could rattle off 100 black superstars. Mm-hmm. From Ricky Henderson and Dave Winfield and Kirby Puckett and Willie Stargell. I'm not going in order here, but chronologically, and Dave Parker, and start thinking about every team. And, here in Kansas City, Frank White and Willie Wilson, and, go up and down every single team. And you could find not good players, superstars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now you look in the game, like who's the biggest black superstar in baseball right now? Certainly Jose, you guys are going to get a little over a third of a season of Mookie Betts, and you'll hope that they can sign him. They can. It's Dodger money. They can do whatever they want if they want to bring him back. But in the 70s and 80s, there were a dozen or 20 Mookie Bettses. Mm-hmm. And so that's a problem in the sport right now. And I think it's in some ways it's being addressed. I know here in Kansas City, I have, this is the legendary Buck O'Neill. And I never actually had the chance to meet him. He passed away in 2007 and I got here in 2008, but we have the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum here in Kansas City. It's a treasure. I tell people it's not just a baseball museum, it's a history museum. And Buck O'Neil was the legendary player and manager, and he had Jackie Robinson stories and you name it. And so it's a special place here. We need to make sure, and right behind the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, they started a couple of years ago as a Royals endeavor, what's called the Kansas City Urban Youth Academy. And the goal isn't to produce major leaguers. The goal is to produce kids that are growing up underprivileged, to give them opportunities in baseball, softball, but also education and different programs. And who knows, maybe one day there will be some kids that come out of that. Maybe baseball does get better. But, Jose, kind of getting back to what you're saying and everything that's going on in the country, like, we need to figure out a way to come together. And I'm not telling anything to you guys that everybody hasn't heard before, but like, if you think about sports brings people together. Like, I got this image that I show in some of my speeches, 800,000 people at the Royals championship parade. This town isn't an 800,000 person town. All right. This is, we're a smaller city in the Midwest. They call this flyover country. And yet 800,000 people, not just from Kansas City, but, from Iowa and Nebraska and, Missouri and Kansas and beyond showed up for this thing. And no one was arguing about politics or race or any of that stuff. So that is one of the factors, sports, that I think can bring some people together. And I hope that that's the case. But, at the same time, very disheartening that it took 3 months to figure out how to get these guys back on the field. Now, I'll buy every bit of the way the argument about safety and having to shut down. Most businesses did have to send people home. But for it to have taken at least an extra month because they were too busy arguing, how does a pandemic turn into a labor dispute? For a sport that says it's America's pastime, and for a sport that prides itself on the one of bringing people together, and we brought everybody back together after 9/11, and look at what happened in New York and all of that. We're there when it matters most, and we'll celebrate the heck out of this game when it comes back next month, and it'll be emotional. But it should have happened on July 4th. Nothing we can do about it now. So I know I'm all over the place, Jose, on that one, but I do think sports does and should serve an important role in bringing people together. We need more of that right now, whether it's sports or just people putting their differences aside and understanding, like, we got 3 guys here on this podcast right now that all look very different from each other, right? I don't see any issues between the 3 of us, and I'm pretty sure if the 3 of us went out for a beer, there would be no issues. I would welcome any conversations that we could have to be better. And I don't think I have it all figured out, or I'm not a hero or whatever, but isn't that common sense, really? So I don't know. I'm off on a rant, I guess, but
no, it's good stuff. I think it's good stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's a place for teaming, and that's in sports. For some reason, our society has decided to jump on teams and just only support and defend their team and their laundry or whatever that is right now. And that's a big issue we have.
Yeah. So I'll give you a different one. Maybe this will be more fun. So I don't know what it was about Yasiel Puig, but I really liked watching him play, right? He kind of reminded me of my nephew. I liked the energy he brought. I love the bat flips. But what do you think about that? Do you think that people are breaking unwritten rules and we shouldn't do that, or does it bring excitement to the game?
It's a great question. As you're saying this, I'm trying to call up my notes to see because I try to go back in and put notes in. I got it. I found it. There's not much in here. I talked to Puig last year, right after he'd been traded to Cleveland. So that would have been in August. If you remember, he was traded for Trevor Bauer from Cincinnati to Cleveland. And that was right after Bauer had a infamous moment. His last ever game pitching for the Indians was at Kauffman Stadium here in Kansas City. And he got upset. They were rocking him. The Royals were, and they were probably in last place or second to last place. And I think they got up for 7 or 8 runs, and he took the ball and he chucked it over the center field fence, the center field wall, and it's pretty. The manager came out, Jay Francona, and pulled him in. It was a whole scene, and then 2 days later, he's traded, and Puig ends up in Cleveland. And shortly after that, it says right here in my notes, August 24th. So this would have been a few weeks later. I think I was talking to him about being excited about he had just become a U.S. citizen and how much he loved the country. And so I was just looking back at those notes, and he's a big fan of Jorge Soler, who's with us in Kansas City, home run champion last year in the American League. But this is an interesting question, Jose, because I think that, and myself included, I was sort of raised in this game, and I don't have baseball blood like some of the people I work with. But even in my time in TV, I was raised like, this is the way you play the game. This is the way you respect the game. This is the way you do it. You don't flip bats. You don't show people up. You don't blah, blah, blah. And, you oftentimes will see guys coming from the Latin American countries that have struggled at times to adhere to that. And, what I've come to learn over the years, and it'll be interesting to see the way this changes if it does in terms of inclusion and, accepting all, is that there's just a different culture down in Cuba where Puig grew up, or in the Dominican Republic, or Puerto Rico, or Venezuela. And it's one that, I always heard it. It was like, they always say, I think we saw this on the recent documentary with McGuire and Sosa, like the way you grow up there, you don't grow up wanting to walk. You want to grow up wanting to hit. You want to hit your way off the island, is what I always heard. And so it's a different style and different personality. And so it was always seen as showing someone up. How come the Latin guys always show everyone up? Why don't they just trot around the bases? Or why do they need to pump fists and point up in the air and do all this stuff to celebrate a strikeout? Just act like you've been there. And then you come to realize after a while, it's like they're just enjoying the game. And that's the way that they were raised. And it might be different than the way people here were raised, in the same way that in our country, someone that was raised in the city is different than someone that was raised in the country. And someone that was raised in Northern California is different than someone that was raised in Southern California. You tell me similarities between someone that grows up in LA versus San Francisco, right? So, of course there's going to be differences. So, I think there are a lot of things that Puig probably has done, and I don't know him, that have ruffled feathers. And ultimately, I think it would be his teammates that would sit there and tell you, is he a good teammate or a bad teammate? And my guess is you'll probably get different answers on that, because at times it's looked like he's been selfish at times with some things. Mm-hmm. You know what? These guys are kids.
Right.
And he's grown up now. I bet he's different now than he was when he broke in, but why do we need to make everybody act one specific way?
Right.
And so that's sort of what I've learned in recent years, is like, we used to call a guy like him a showboat or a hot dog, but I guess if we want to call him that, we can. That doesn't make him a bad guy. And you know what? The other thing too, like the young kids that are playing the video games, I'm sounding old now. They love that. They love that stuff.
Yeah,
they do.
They want to see personality.
Right.
So I think guys like him, I remember Jose one year, it was a bunch of years ago, the World Cup was going on. And I just remember being in the Dodgers locker room. They were here in interleague play against Kansas City. And I think Mexico was playing. I think it was Mexico, but I don't remember. And somebody scored a goal. So this was like, 4 in the afternoon, 5 in the afternoon before game. And so I'm in there. I think I was waiting, like trying to talk to Zach Greinke is my guess, because he was, former Royal Cy Young Award winner. And like somebody scores a goal. And I remember looking and seeing Adrian Gonzalez and Yasiel Puig sprinting in circles. They were wearing soccer jerseys, I think, too, around in the visiting clubhouse, just trying to act out and celebrate the goal. And I was like, man, this is like a party in here. Like, what's going on? So, I think it's good. I do.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Nice.
That's awesome. Cool. Hey, Joel, we really appreciate you being on. I mean, I know we're taking a little bit more than an hour of your time, but we really appreciate it. Yeah, man. And we hope to have you on again one day. This is just great.
I'd love to. I got to give you guys one last one because this is fun. I think, Joe, I might have told you a little bit about this, and I will give you the quick version. But I'm so privileged and lucky, less than 2 years ago now, to have been asked to go overseas with a Royals contingent on a USO tour. And I'd missed one game in, at that point, 11 and a half years for a death in the family in 08. And so now I'm missing 6. I'm working. So, I mean, I've only ever missed one work day. And they sent me over for September 11th to Kuwait with 4 former Royals. I think I still have this. It's up in here somewhere. Anyway, George Brett, the Hall of Famer, Mike Sweeney, Reggie Sanders, and Brett Saberhagen. So we go over there. We're watching. We went to 3 bases, and we're watching the Royals play the White Sox live on TV from a USO building at Camp Buring in Kuwait. 200 or so servicemen and women in there. I'm broadcasting live, interviewing servicemen and women, interviewing our former players live. It's 3 to 6 in the morning, now September 12th, but back home at Kauffman Stadium, September 11th. Coolest thing I've ever done. And then we went to different, a few other bases. And so we're at this Air Force base. El Jabber, I think, was the name of it. And it was, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, if you know, but I know that it was a base that had been taken over by the Iraqis during the Gulf War, because I know that we, the Americans, they took us on a tour, had bombed the hangars. Mm-hmm. So we went into the hangars and you could see the massive holes because they were trying to take out the Iraqi planes. Now the Kuwaitis and the Americans run that base. I mean, it was secretive enough that they wouldn't tell us where we were going. That was one of the 3 stops where they wouldn't tell us until we got there where we were going. It was that sensitive. And we get in there, and this will forever stick with me. And I know that you'll appreciate this, but so we get to meet the commander, and the colonel. He's one of, I think it was 12 pilots on site. So he told us they had 20 pilots. They had 12 F-16s and 20 pilots. And he was one of them. So he brings us into this debriefing room, and we had to, this will probably make sense to you guys, but it blew us away. We had to put our iPhones and anything in a dish to go into this room. And, he's doing a PowerPoint showing us eradicating ISIS, and, he's showing us video of smart bombs. Mm-hmm. And there's 2 things that stood out there. One, George Brett. I don't know about you guys. I don't know how many people that could basically puff their chest out to the commander of a base, right? A colonel that flies F-16s, but George Brett's legendary, arguably the greatest third baseman of all time. And George says, "Colonel, the Navy told us this morning they'd get us out there on one of their ships. What are you going to do for us?" And he said, "You're not getting up in one of those planes." By the way, we never talked to the Navy either. He made that one up. So that didn't go up. And then I remember Mike Sweeney said we could hear the F-16s taking off right beyond the wall where he was doing the PowerPoint. No windows in there. Mm-hmm. You could hear the F-16s taking off, and he says, Mike Sweeney says, because the Royals train in Surprise, Arizona, not too far down the road from the Dodgers in Glendale, right by the Air Force Base over there. Luke Air Force Base, right?
Yeah, Luke. Yeah, I think that's Luke.
Yeah, it's a nightmare nightmare for a TV guy that like every 30 seconds you try to do an interview or you try to do something on camera, and then the jets fly over, like, oh God, I got to time this out. Sweeney says, guys, can we stop it?
Yeah, we stop the airplanes.
Please. Sweeney says, "Colonel, so what are the planes are taking off, what are they working on today? Like, what are they practicing? What are the drills?" The colonel looks at me and he goes, "Sir, we don't practice over here. This is the real deal. So we practice back at home at Luke Air Force Base." He said, "They're going over to bomb targets right now in Syria." And that's when it sunk into me. And then, so this is my final point to this. And I tell audiences this. 20 pilots, 12 planes, and he told us something like 1,200 people on that base to make it work. So my message to audiences is this: you don't have to be the pilot. Well, what do? I'm just a cook. I guess what? You don't cook that food right. And there's a pilot up there, life and death, that's not feeling so good. And I told you this one, Joe, the other day. I'm just a maintenance guy. Yeah, well, guess what? It's 120 degrees over here. And if that damn air conditioning's not working, no one's sleeping at night. How are they expected to be effective in a life and death situation when they haven't had any sleep? And I got a written letter from a senior airman who was not a baseball fan. And he said, I'm a baseball fan now of the Royals forever after what you guys did. He said, my unit's the one that keeps everything going over here, because when the air conditioning breaks down, it's like primitive times. And that's the message I have for audiences, is you don't have to be that colonel or that pilot. You don't have to be the guy on TV that everybody sees their face, because without everybody doing all the work in the truck and the cameraman and the audio and the video and all that, none of it works. That's why the military culture is so good. So, like I tell audiences, that colonel was like, in our world, straight out of, Tom Cruise, Top Gun. He was Maverick. But what you don't see in all that stuff is all the people behind the scenes. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, because I think your audience probably knows that, or if they don't, they should be reminded of it, that, we all have a role to play. And that's where the great sports teams have that 25th man on the roster, or that 53rd or whatever guy in the NFL roster. You never know when their number is going to be called.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my perspective.
That's great, Joel. Thank you. And
Yeah.
So, hey, whenever we wrap these up, we do this thing called a leadership rapid fire. So we're about to shoot you a series of 4 questions, and it's however you interpret them and however you want to answer them. All right.
Okay.
All right. First question: what is your favorite leadership trait?
I would say, oh gosh, there's so many. Rapid fire too. I accountability.
Okay.
Accountability. It's not it's not about me, it's about you.
Mm-hmm.
And what can I do to make you better? And when it's wrong. Super quick story. I got a player, Eric Hosmer, who played for the Royals, who messed up in a game. And he said, I messed up. I could have lost us the game. And I come to find out later it was the coach's fault. He was never going to say that. No, I got this. That's accountability.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. What is your favorite quote?
I heard, and I've heard multiple people say I don't know who said it. Like, I've heard everything from, like, I don't know if it was General Patton, or I've heard like Madame Curie. I don't know, but I heard it was something along the lines of, and it was probably not like politically or gender correct, but many, many years ago, it was something like along the lines of chances favor the prepared man. So say it however you want. But I think about that one all the time. Like, when you're prepared, you can handle anything.
Yeah. I think Russell Wilson says separations into preparation, so we'll go with that as a Seahawks fan.
Yep. like a Seahawks fan. By the way, Russell Wilson, graduate of my university, the University of Wisconsin. So.
Yes, Badgers. All right. What is what would be a recommended book, a book that you would recommend to an aspiring leader?
There's so many. It's not really a leadership book, but it's the perspective book for me. Okay. I mentioned Buck O'Neil in the Negro Leagues Museum, but there's a book called The Soul of Baseball, written by Joe Posnanski, who I believe is one of the best sports writers of his time. It's one I've actually read 3 times, and basically Joe followed Buck O'Neil and the current president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, Bob Kendrick, around for 1 whole year. And it's about race, it's about life, a little bit of baseball too, and there's leadership in there. The Soul of Baseball. It's a great pick-me-up and a good reminder.
Awesome. Good stuff. And we'll put that in the show notes too for the listeners. All right. And then the last one, this is the deep question. We're all about life, learning, and leadership at the Llama Lounge. So how do you find harmony between life, learning, and leadership?
Whew. Well, I do think that there are moments every day to learn, every moment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's life. And, and I think that you take those lessons. And I think that if you instill those lessons and share them with others, that is leadership. Leaders don't have to be, and I mentioned this before, leaders don't have to be the top guy in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
top woman in the organization. We can be leaders just by making people better, right? Like, if you guys are any better for this conversation tonight, if your listeners are any better for this conversation, then there's an element of leadership, hopefully, to me, and that involves the life and the learning. Life should be learning every day. Mm-hmm. There should not, you name me one successful person that has ever said, I got it all figured out. Mm-hmm. If they are, you can fill in the blank of what they are, right? And then the best leaders pass it on. Yeah. So that's the harmony there is back to what I said before, be inquisitive, listen, ask questions, pay attention, learn from it, and then pass it on to others. That's a form of leadership to me.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Man, Joel, we are really appreciative of you. We're grateful that you took the time to be on the Llama Lounge, and man, we really need to have you on again. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to do it. I'm grateful and honored that you guys would have me, and anytime I'm thrilled to do it. So it's good to spend time with you guys. I said it at the start, in this crazy virtual world that we live in, it does allow all of us to be a little bit more connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in once again. And, be safe, stay healthy, and llamas are out.
Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to the Llama Lounge podcast. Be sure to visit the homepage for links to products and services related to this episode. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. See you next time.